carves into some. I use 3 different substances. One is linoleum, a substance called Sintra, which is like PVC, or wood. Those are the 3, and each one gives a different feeling. Linoleum prints, which there's 2 linoleum prints over there. Very hard start graphic lines. Easy to carve, gives you, it's hard to get, you know, a lot of, you can carve to get texture, that's about it. Sintra, I like using Sintra. Sintra is a kind of a PVC. The nice thing about Sintra is you can actually cut it apart and put it back together like a jigsaw puzzle. There's a print over on the wall over there that is a combination model print and relief print. And we're done with Sintra, and you can see kind of the outline. There's kind of almost a white haze around that actual image. That's where, that it's the brief, the one right in the middle, right behind the desk. You can see almost a little white space between the face and the blue. So how I achieved that is I cut the Sintra apart, inked it separately, put it together, back together like a jigsaw puzzle. That's the nice thing about Sintra. Wood has mind of its own. It has texture, it has hardness, it has, depending on the wood you're using, it's harder to carve, things like that. So those are but it's got a softer, more natural feel to it. It gives you a softer image, a little warmer, things like that. So those are the 3 substances that I use to carve into. A little bit about my work. Really started working again around 2013, 2014, after my daughter graduated high school. I found myself with a lot of time. She played travel softball, and she traveled all over the nation, and I was the one that traveled with her. So, and as soon as she graduated, I had plenty of time on my hands, and I said, what am I going to do? And I said, well, let's start getting back in art. So I started working on, started really with painting. Because printmaking is all about access. A lot of times you don't have a press, you don't have room to do it. Things like that, you're not allowed to work very big if you don't have a press or things like this. There's ways around it, but you're kind of limited in space, and I was living in a small apartment. And so I really got back into it and started with painting. And then in 2012, I moved to Elbow Lake, and I had bought a big house, and I had room in my house to start printmaking. And I was talking, I said I really got back into it 2014, 2015. And I think in 2016, I did 60 shows across the nation where I was juried into 60 different shows. The nice thing about printmakers, you can have the same print in different shows at the same time. So the other thing is, you get a call from the gallery or something falls off the wall. That's no problem, I'll just make more. Things like that. That's the nice thing about printmaking. So in 2018, I started working on a series of prints, and I really wanted to try to capture emotion in a figure, things like that. I've always worked with nudes. I'm always fascinated by the human side of subject matter, working with figures, faces, things like this. And so I really wanted to try to capture emotion. And so some of these prints, that's where this start came from. You see the print Grief Free back there. There's a print called Weep here. This is not sorrow, but I can't remember. This one right here is called Worry. I really wanted to try to catch human emotion, try to connect to the viewer to make them say, hey, I felt like that, or I know, to try to gather more of a connection. That was really in 2018. And so coming into 2020, I wanted to work big again. In 2017, I did a project with, wrote a legacy grant, and I got a $9,000 legacy grant to do a street rowing event here at the PRCA and one at the Cadets. And then I did 14 8-foot woodcuts to be displayed at the Cadets and here, and I incorporated the prints from the street rowing event with kids into those shows. So coming into 2020, I wanted to start working big again. And I'm like, well, I've already done big woodcuts and things like this. And I'm like, okay, what could I do that's a little different? And through some conversations with a couple of people at the Cadets and other art professionals, the idea of printing on actual doors came about. And then I was just like, well, you could actually mount the print in the door frame in the gallery and add more of an installation type piece where people actually see the print. The thing that I really gathered from the big prints that I did in 2017, people were actually more interested in the cuts sometimes, the size of the woodcut than the print. And they were saying, oh, how'd you do that? That's really cool. It's a piece of art by itself. And I was like, how can I incorporate the cut with the print? And the idea of printing on doors came about. So that, and then we're thinking about a subject matter. I was thinking about subject matter, and I'm like, well, I was thinking about abuse and things that people almost want to keep behind that door. These two prints came about in late 2018, early 2019, where you're actually peering into somebody's world, like a room, like you're looking in on them. And so that was kind of the turn towards this, going into the door and, looking into what's behind that door. And that's where Behind the Door came about. And the idea of addressing the drug addiction and the opioid crisis at the time, Prince had just died of an opioid overdose. I started addressing this, or had this idea to address this issue before the pandemic. It was really funny because I'm addressing an epidemic during a pandemic. And this was kind of the top story in the world before the pandemic started, was the opioid, and now it's coming back because it's going to be worse. I saw an article 2 weeks ago that in 2020, there was a 40% rise in opioid deaths in Minnesota during the pandemic because people did not have access to resources to get help. And they say over the next 10 years, because of the pandemic, it's going to be that much worse. So I really felt that this was something that needed to be addressed. In a way, I kind of missed the boat with, but everyone's addressing the pandemic. It's, things like that. So I really wanted to start addressing the things that people might want to keep behind that door and peering into it. And then through discussions with healthcare professionals and things like this, they said a door is a two-way portal. Those people are actually trying to break through that door and come back into, a normal life for things like that. And they're trying to leave that room. So that was the other thing. So it was kind of a two-way theme of coming, back through that door. And through the show, this show has been, 2 of the doors were in Grand Rapids last fall. That was the start of the project. The show went to the University of Minnesota in November, and it was shut down during the pandemic. So hopefully in the future, they invited me back in the future to do a joint project with their mental health department to be able to address this issue. From the University of Minnesota, I went right to the Phipps Gallery in Hudson, Wisconsin in February. And then I was back in the Cadets, headed at the Cadets Gallery in May. And that was the first time I actually got to talk to people live about it, which has been really nice. Doing it online where people actually don't see the work in person and see the size of it, I think it's impactful with the size of it and the installation area of the work and things like that. So it is so nice to be able to start talking about this work live. Through the Cadets Gallery, I also had the opportunity to do a private showing with the Matthew House in Fergus Falls, which is a halfway house for recovering addicts. I had a private showing with 20 recovering addicts, which was very insightful, very emotional, because they were sharing their story about how they felt with the work. I wanted to make sure that I was hitting the mark also too with the work and telling a story, being able to properly address the subject. Having no experience in addiction myself, it's tough for an artist to maybe address, a lot of artists do a lot of stuff that's real personal to them, to try to tell a story, things like this. This is kind of a tough story for me to tell in ways because I have no personal connection with addiction, or had a family member that's, had an addiction problem or things like this. Talking to that group was very insightful, very, as I said, very emotional. Like people come up and says, I have a friend that's dying right now of an addiction, and this piece really struck me. The piece with the rosary, I had one of the addicts come up, recovering addicts come up to me and he asked me a question. There's one pill that isn't colored. I forgot to color it. I just forgot. I didn't notice it. It's one right next to the cross. And he come up and he says, you know what? That tells me, because right now, that's the balance between what I'm going through. Whether I'm going back to the pills or, back to following Christ or things like this. And he says, that's what spoke to me, because it's neutral. It's neutral. It's not either one. I intentionally forgot to color it. And right there, having that interaction with someone like that, to see that's what, saying, you hit me with that, because that's what I'm going through right now. I'm balancing where I'm going and trying to get to this point out of that point, things like this. So that's been fun, tough, all these emotions, things like this with these doors. And my goal for this is to continue with this work. I've had the opportunity to teach classes with the Matthew House. They've actually come in for permit. I've got them know them. I've been to their prayer service. They invite me to their Bible studies, and I go when I can, and things like that, to be able to, it helps me just as much as it helps them. And my goal with this is to actually continue to tell this story, maybe form a really good relationship with one of them that's willing to really share their experience, and I tell their story, or tell somebody's personal story with this and things like this. So this is really a foundation of the show. I'm hoping I've written a couple grants. I want to continue working on doors, continue addressing not maybe only the opioid addiction, but other things that, abuse that happens in other people's world, to help start the conversation, to get it more out there, aware, and help the people that are struggling with these issues to come back into normalcy, things like that. So that's a lot about the artwork, so where I'm at now. So, yeah. Are there any questions? I know I probably spoke pretty fast and pretty, I try to slow down as much as I can.
I really appreciated what you had to say, because when I was in here earlier today, I was looking at these things and, I just couldn't connect, and hearing you talk, it was very, very powerful.
Thank you. And I think that's what I'm trying to reach for, is being able to make that connection with people and tell a story, and be able to address an issue that's out there that that's really in the last, really year and a half has really kind of been put on the back burner. And it's still there, and it's worse than it is. It's worse, now than it's ever been, things like that. So I think, and connecting with the recovering addicts at the Matthew House has really helped me tell that story, and help me, form that, you know, somewhat of a personal connection with, you know, with them and their addiction and their story and things like that. So,
Well, cool.
thank you. Thank you. Yes.
So, you have a few faces, but
Yep.
I see that hands are really kind of prominent.
Well,
So what is it about hands that you feel really is so expressive?
I think
Why do they seem to be first and foremost?
part of it, I think that's part of, you know, if you watch me talk, where are my hands? They're all over the place. You know, we talk with our bodies. We, you know, we say things with our mouths, but we talk with our body. And with hands, to me, that's part of my expression and how I am. And I think it's very important in emotion to be able to show it. It's, you know, you can show that in a face, but a hands just almost bring that out more. It almost frames the face. It almost, you know, helps tell the story. Plus, I think I love doing the creases in the fingers and drying hands. And I think, you know, Jenny, we always, you know, one of the first things we ever did probably was sit and try to draw our hand. You know, you talk about negative and positive space, and, you know, if someone is struggling drawing their fingers or their hand, you look at the negative space to help define the positive space. And, you know, you look at all the creases and all the things that, you know, we have going on in our hands. I think that's just as, to me, that's just as interesting as the face. And I think it's part of the body. It's part of the body. And even though I'm concentrating on a face, those hands help tell that story. So, and I think they're just as interesting as the face. So.
I also think of the hand pushing the door open.
Yep. Yeah, I feel that, you know, that was part of, you know, I can't say that was intentional, but, you know, when I got down with the work, it actually is like someone trying to, you know, throw that door open and help break that, you know, and it's also struggling to do that. It's also, you know, it's not like here I am, I'm through. It's like I'm trying to get through, and it's trying to push through the doors. So, you know.
You know, you had mentioned that you wanted to maybe get to know someone well enough to tell their particular story. In some ways, I kind of like it, and maybe that's part of what I like about the hands too. Is it's like you're telling a lot of stories. It's not just one particular story.
Yep.
And so, for me, it means sort of like the young man. I think you said the same thing. Who found meaning in that mist color.
Yep.
That sort of makes it more inclusive.
Yep. I mean, well, and that's it. You know, when he came up and tells me that means, I mean, you know, I'm starting to do what I set out to do, is making a connection with the viewer. And that's the, you know, when I started getting back into it, I really kind of struggled to find a theme. And, you know, I've always been focused on the figure and, you know, things like this. And when I started again, it was more trying to get back into the skill set to develop skills again. And, you know, I do this because it's interesting, it's over here, and I do this and things like this. I mean, it really never really, you know, my work has always been, all over here, you know, all over here. This is really, I've talked to people that have followed my work the last few years, and when they saw the show at the Cadets and the show, it was really the first time that they said it felt like it all fit together, that you could see the progression of where you started and where you're going, and it really does a good job of fitting together and making that connection with the viewer and things like this. I mean, I'm starting to get there, I feel, you know.
There must be some big technical challenges in making something so big.
It is. I think that's probably the most asked question is the first one. How long does it take to do the doors? They probably per door, I would say, in between 40 to 50 hours between planning. Planning, I use Photoshop a lot. I take my drawings or my ideas and I put them into Photoshop and I really plan them out. It was really funny being a printmaker, you always work in reverse. You know, Phyllis knows this. Back when we were going to school, what we had to do, we had to draw boxes or take the Xerox machine and reverse it and things like that. Photoshop is incredible. I can take my image, move it around, boom, 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 take the size that I want. 36, that's a 36 by 80 door, by the way. Do it to scale, print it out, draw, you know, and transfer it to the door. Things like that. A lot easier than we have, you know, used to do. I see everything planned out right away. So I'm not making many decisions during the carving process. Those decisions have already been made electronically, really. It just seems to be easier, things like that. Really how I do it is I transfer it to the door in reverse, take Sharpie and draw in where I know I want to keep it black and keep doing that. The toughest part is these doors are actually pretty surprisingly easy to carve compared to plywood or pine or anything that you would use for normal printmaking for wood. Because there's grain and hard spots and knots and things like that, you really got to incorporate those into, you know, your plan. Being a composite door, pretty easy to carve. I actually carved through it a few times because I carved too deep, you know, which is fine. It doesn't really matter. The toughest thing is printing that big. Hand burnished, has to be hand burnished. Paper that size is very expensive. Phyllis probably knows that. I think the roll of paper that I bought to do, I still got paper left from the 2017 process where I did the 14A for woodcuts, but that roll of paper was $1,500 to get good printmaking paper that size. Thank God for LRAC, to be able to do, that was part of that legacy grant that I wrote. Things like that. The challenge is printing, is inking that big. Once I'm done carving and taking a few proofs, and what I'll usually do is take a proof in a section. If I'm not quite sure how it's looking, I'll section out. But then you seal the door, you put your paper on the door and lay it out flat, put the paper on the door, and then what I do is I weight it down, ink 2 to 3 feet at a time. And I've got 2 favorite wooden spoons that I use. They're all nice and shiny from the back and from burnishing. And I'll weight it down and I'll make 2 to 3 feet at a time and hand burnish it, pull it back. Okay, I need some more ink here. Put it back down. Once I get those 2 to 3 feet done, I'll maybe move the weights, depending on where I've got them, maybe just down another foot or 2, do 2 to 3 feet, then shift the weights to this end, peel the paper back, and keep working the way down the door. That's probably the toughest part, is to get it inked. And burnished, I always said when I did those 14 April woodcuts, this arm looked really good. This one, not so much. So
What does burnish mean?
burnish means you basically rub it. You ink the wood, put the paper on it, and you rub it to transfer the ink onto the paper. So
And you can peel it off and put it back without.
as long as you keep it in the same spot. So that's
How do you?
how I weights, clamps, books, heavy books. So I knew that it wasn't shift. The nice thing about working that big too is the paper didn't want to shift because it's big. You basically weight it in an area so you know that it's not going to shift like this, because if it shifts like that, your image is ruined. So basically what I would do is I would clamp the paper so it wouldn't move back and forth, peel it, ink it, put it back down, burnish it and rub it, peel it back up, and then until it was good. Then I'd weight that section down because I knew it's good, and keep moving down the door. It probably took 2 hours to 2.5 hours to ink a door, I would think.
So how many prints are there?
These are one of a kind. These are one of a kind. You know, I did a few proofs. I didn't do many full length proofs. I think I full length proofed that one a couple times just because there was so much cutting on it. Really, one print. It's one of those things too. If someone wanted the actual print, I would print it, but it really is meant to be displayed with the door. So I mean, it's one of these things. If someone says, "Oh, I really like that print, but I just want the print," I would pull the door off and reprint it and do that. But it's really they're really one of a kind. I don't expect to. You know, I would probably print more than 1 or 2 of them.
I'm curious, okay, so my wood cutting tools
Yep.
are this big. Is that the size?
That's
you're
exactly
using?
that's the size that.
Just curious.
Yep. Nope. Basically, that's it. They're for this. It's the best tool to use because you can get fine. You can, and with the doors being composite, that's the easiest. When I did the big wood cuts on plywood, my Dremel was my best. I actually went through 3 Dremels because I burned them out. You know, things like that because the wood's so much harder that I couldn't use those tools on actual plywood and things like that. So basically, what I would do is I would score my area with a knife, so I had a little bit of an edge, and I went with the Dremel so it wouldn't splinter, things like that. So the Dremel was another great invention, I guess, as far as I'm concerned, for someone who works in wood, is a Dremel. So I think that's the toughest process was actually printing them. The carving them was pretty easy. This wood is really fairly easy to carve, and you can get good hard lines, and it doesn't really splinter because it's composite like pine or plywood or anything like that. So.
Any other questions, comments?
I'm really drawn to the mirror and the living room.
Mhm. Yep.
Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Sure. Actually, those were really in the series, I was working with the emotional figures and pieces. I kind of made a shift towards actually looking into a room or a door or things like this. And they're really more contemplating of what's really going on in those, what is that person thinking about? Looking into at that moment with that person looking, you're actually looking in on them, you're really, it's almost like they don't know you're there. And you're kind of getting a glimpse of what maybe is going on in the world, but their world. There's one more piece in that series, which is called the bedroom, which is man and woman actually in the bedroom. I'm trying to think of the composition. It's him sitting in the chair and he's very contemplative, and she's behind him. So it was more of that's done in linoleum. It gives you those hard stark lines, which you look at how that image is done. That would be really tough to do in wood to get it to look like the way I wanted it to look. Linoleum, Sintra, I love them. Wood, not my favorite. The doors, I like the composition of the doors. I like, the installation. I wanted to move more towards installation style art because printmaking is usually not done that way, where it's done big and shown with the cut. Usually, if you see big printmaking, it's just really the print. You don't usually see the wood, the wood cuts or the cut with it, things like this. So I really like the doors. Wood's not my favorite. It just isn't. So I mean, that was kind of that move, that shift to looking into someone's world, which led to the door and things like that. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for having me. I was telling someone, he says, well, I always like showing here because this is really my first place.